All right, welcome to this month's open forum. I'm Eric Smith. I'm the editor of the dispatcher's office from the operations SIG. I want to thank everybody for coming. As we did before, basically this is we'll record the session. I've got one question to start things off. What I would ask is we're going to leave you the ability to unmute yourself, but if you've got a bunch of noise in the background, since we are recording this, if you can put yourself on mute, unless you have a question or want to add something to the discussion, that'll keep down the background noise. So with that said, I'll read the first question. This is from a Stephen Medler. His question is, when through/way freights arrive in the yard on the arrival departure track, I have a question. What should the signals at either end of the arrival departure track look like? And since the engines will be using the lead beyond the AD track, what should they look like? The yard engine and the through freight engine will use these three blocks: left lead, AD track, and right lead to swap cars. So my answer is a blinking yellow at these three area signals signifying time and track permission. So I'll throw out, the only time I've ever seen signals on like a yard is basically little dwarf red and green signals. But I'm going to open this up to people who know way more about this than I do. So does the question make sense? And if so, presumably Stephen will listen to this after the fact. So whatever you've got to share, go ahead.
I'll jump in. It would depend on, I believe, what year he's modeling. It used to be yellow over red. And I think after 1973, they used a flashing red, both of which designated come in slow, being prepared to stop within half the distance of any obstruction. And that's what I use. If I'm wrong, please tell me, because I like to have it right.
Oh, sure. Just relax. It's going to be winter soon.
Okay. Thanks, John. Anybody else have some comments for the question that came in?
Well, wouldn't it be highly dependent on which railroad we're talking about?
But more than likely, yeah. You know, as far as exactly what the signal would look like, but he doesn't specify which railroad or what era, unfortunately. So
let's see. A number of model railroads, I've been using the flashing red, where the more modern would say it would be the lunar. And mostly it's because there's not so many four-headed signals in the modeling market. I see enough of them around lately, but not easily found for the models.
So you said a lunar, Ken?
Yeah, when they went through and changed over the old New York Central through Syracuse, New York, and that line, number of places where they had, undetected track. Some of those have four lamps in one of the heads, and so you got both the green, yellow, red, and lunar, and there's quite a few masts that got set up that might have one color on the top, four in the middle, and three on the bottom, or two in the middle, four on the bottom. Just because, okay, yeah, one of the turnout possibilities is send them into like a transload facility.
Yeah, I'm trying to find a picture example for him.
Yeah, unfortunately, I was a bit late. Did get the original question.
Well, I'll read it again. When through when through/way freights arrive in the yard on the arrival departure track, I have a question. What should the signals at either end of the AD track look like? And since the engines will be using the leads, presumably the switching leads beyond the AD track, what should they look like? The yard engine and the through freight engine will use these 3 blocks, the left lead, the AD track, and the right lead to swap cars. So my answer is a yellow blinking at these 3 area signals signifying time and track permission.
Mhm.
And like I said, not being the expert, my first thought is, well, you're in the yard, so that at least the layouts I've run on, you typically don't deal with signals within the yard. But that's just personal opinion.
I'll go ahead and jump in. If again, depending upon era, but the only yard signals you're going to see are dwarfs because of the clearance requirements to put posts up, put the mast up. Lunar is, in I believe all cases, restricted, which is able to stop half the distance to an obstruction, not to exceed 15 miles an hour. And as far as which end, if it's the signal would probably be restricted, and more than likely the signal at the exit end would be red. Unless because they would logically have no permission to go beyond that. Now, if they got to double the yard, then of course you'd have a restricted at that end, and they'd have instructions for doubling over.
Would there typically be a signal on the yard lead, though? Like a switching lead?
No.
Okay.
But I think there would be a signal before you entered the yard. I agree with Jeff that most signals in the yard are dwarfs, but coming off the main going into the yard to let somebody have permission to come into the yard would be, I think, either a lunar or the flashing red.
Yeah, to come into the yard off of the main, yeah, certainly there'd be some sort of signal there. Okay. Anybody else have anything to send to Stephen, who emailed in his question? So Stephen, if you're listening, feel free to email me again with follow-up and we'll do it at the next one. But the summary of the answers is, 1, it kind of depends what railroad you're modeling. But 2, in general, there wouldn't be signals on the yard leads themselves. There would likely be dwarf, just very short red and green signals at either end of the arrival departure tracks. And as John just said, there would be signals to get into the yard. Likely maybe a red over a yellow or a yellow over red, depending on what railroad you're running. But that's the best we can give you at this point. So thanks for your question, Stephen. Okay, who else has a question? Oh, hold on, I'm gonna read this for the chat. From Mike O'Neill, I have a 3/1 into my yard. The 3 head is for the main line that goes around the yard. The single red is set to flashing red if the diverging route goes into the yard. So cruise, stop, then proceed. So.
I wasn't quite sure if his question was outbound of the yard, or it sounds like it is, versus inbound.
It was more of an inbound, basically, that the through and wait freights arrive in the yard on the arrival departure track. What do the signals look like? Because he needs to be able to use the the switching leads to swap cars.
Hmm.
So, like I said, I wouldn't expect to see any signals within the yard itself other than the dwarf signals. There would be signals protecting the yard.
It depends a lot on what you've got, what the configuration, like in the yards that I've worked at, there was a leaving signal out of the departure tracks to get onto the main, and there was a entering signal on the main to go through the power switch into the yard, but there wasn't anything in the arriving departure tracks themselves because they were all manual hand lined, hand operated switches.
Yeah, let me bring up a quick.
I don't know whether you would ever get a stop and proceed going into a yard. It would be mostly either a restricting or a low speed or something like that. Because there's really not a reason to stop.
Yeah, I'm trying to get a picture of the. Not saying mine is a good example, but it does have some of the track configuration that he's talking about. Okay, so all right, so here is my railroad, which is Proto Lance, not anything special. If you can somebody confirm, can you see my mouse moving here?
Yes.
Okay, so this track going off here is the switching lead. The gray tracks are the east and westbound mains. I do have this train here. These are arrival departure tracks next to the main. So a train coming in here would be pulled down the lead and then worked into the yard if need be. So from a signaling standpoint, I would expect that you could maybe have a dwarf signal here on this arrival departure track on either end, another one on the track hidden by this string of cars, which would be, I think what Dave said is that would be, if it's green, if I'm facing, so that train down at the other end, it'd be a red because I don't have permission to leave. Once I do have permission to leave, then I would be able to go out onto the main. From the main itself, I have a crossover here and then a crossover into the arrival departure. There would be some signals across here protecting this setup here, depending on how the railroad and so on. Probably at least maybe two or three heads to say, well, you can go straight through or you're going to diverge and then you're going to diverge again.
See, there's all sorts of, once you start putting signals in a yard, in the yard tracks, you get all sorts of funky things happening with the rules.
Right.
And so it's easier to not have them and just have controlling entering the main.
Yep. Yeah, we definitely have some sort of signals here on the concrete track to control how you got into the yard or into the arrival departure track. But beyond that, as you said,
I think that right at that junction of your backdrop here, well, there and right there, just to the right of that, you'd have at least two heads, one for the one for going forward and one for the diverging.
Yep.
And the diverging one would be the one that you would have either a yellow or a flashing red. The flashing red would be probably more prevalent. And then back where your mouse first was, I'll bow to Dave on this one, but I think there would be at least three heads there. Well, for the main, for that passing siding, and then the third one for the entering the yard. That be right, Dave?
Well, you'd have to go to whatever signal system You
during a portion of that.
Oh, there's another track there too. I'm sorry.
you would have to either go to your rule book and see what it is, because you could have two heads. Like if it's a modern signal system, it's probably just going to have two heads, because that's all you need is a diverging signal. If you're doing something older, they may have three heads.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, if you got real fancy, let me find this.
It'd be two or three.
So here's another configuration. This was something I was thinking about for this area. Instead of having the sort of the wiggle, is basically doing slip switches. So you can get to, instead of, having to come over and then come over again, be able to go straight down by lining all of the puzzle switches. Now this would make here you would probably have to have, across here, probably three heads, right? Well,
Modern
no,
would be
even
two.
that.
Modern
Still
would
only
just be two.
Yeah, because you can't go from here up to here. So
Well, like I say, it depends on on a
yeah,
G core modern, it would be two, because you're going to go on a diverging route. You're either normal or diverging. So
no, even up here, if you were up on this top track here and you were going all the way over to here, this is one of the arrival
diverging route.
departures, it would still just show diverging.
Yeah.
Okay. Even though technically you're diverging twice, it's really, well, you're going to go through some switches. That's all it's telling you.
Well, yeah.
Okay.
Well, right after that first one, you have two there at the first one. Then over that double slip, you'd have two, because there's two routes, either straight or diverging. Then over the other one, you'd probably have two, because it's either straight or diverging. Is that close, Dave?
Well,
this bottom one is just a yard lead, by the way.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
Yep.
Now, for simplicity, you'd have a double head over at where the mouse cursor is now.
Yep.
You'd have a double head on both tracks.
Right.
And then over at where the mouse cursor is now, you'd have a double head on on that one, and a single head on the other track.
Yep.
And then you would have a dwarf between the yard lead. No, back over to where you were before. Up the other side of between the second double switch and the main line, right above that track. In between the two tracks, you would have it wouldn't be back there. It would be back where you had the cursor, where it says SLU 836, right above that. Right above that would be a dwarf signal. If you put the signal back to the right of the double slip, then every time the yard engine makes a move in or out of that yard track, they're going to have to get permission from the dispatcher.
Oh gosh.
Because if you make it a controlled switch inside the interlocking, the control point, then the dispatcher is going to have to line it. Now, a lot of times in a yard, if they have something like that, they'll have an auto thing that it always lines into the track or something like that. It always lines a through route. If it's normal, it just, auto lines it. But, when you start getting, that's why I say things get funky when you put signals in a yard.
Yep.
And the other thing is, if you put a signal in the yard there, the switch engine can't stop right over the top of that switch in reverse directions, that double slip, because that would be reversing directions within a control point, which is a no-no.
So Eric,
Eric, are the two top tracks directional?
The two top tracks in this are basically, so this would be, the top one would basically be the eastbound main. The second one down is the westbound main. This track here is the yard lead. This is an arrival departure track. So this is just something I played with, but it seemed sort of relevant to our discussion. So
The reason I ask is I'm wondering if you really want to have tracks coming in on the directional track going in the opposite direction. And so I don't know whether that would have a bearing on where the signals.
Oh, no. This little red thing, that was just left over from SCARM. That has nothing to do with direction. Generally, you've got traffic going, it's right-hand running. So this middle track is going this way. The top track is going this way.
Okay, so the top of the map is south.
Yes.
Top of the map is basic. Yeah. Correct.
I'm kind of with Dave on this one, and that once one gets off the main line, you're in yard limits, and, and the rules for that specify that you move prepared to stop. I don't honestly feature any signals within the yard itself once you get off the main track.
Yep. I think that's how I would probably, even if I were to go back and redo my, this connection where you've got a crossover, then another crossover, then a switch with something more like that should be smoother. But I've heard that these slip switches can be a nightmare. So yeah,
it's not as much the switch problem, it's a human operator problem.
Yeah.
We could probably do something with JMRI routes to line everything up to make it easier, but yeah, knowing which one to throw gets confusing from what I've seen.
Yeah.
So
I mean, they're called puzzle switches for a reason.
Yeah.
And they're a maintenance headache.
Yeah.
And the way the points are aligned, you can't actually set them up to both go straight through or both curve. If you have to choose from your entry to which exit you want.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, I think we've beaten that horse dead, but yeah, there's definitely some ideas there, but it seems like the simplest thing is don't have signals inside the yard. Let's see. There's a question about, is there anyone who knows anyone I can connect with who models the modern Northeast corridor? I would like to build the New Jersey and New York section. Hard to find resources where I currently live.
One guy I can think of, Eric, is and I don't know if he does the Northeast corridor. Gary Evans would know for sure, but Alan Bell, I think.
Yeah. Yep.
I think he does know.
Well, he's got like all New York Central and Albany and on his layout, doesn't he? Isn't Albany sort of the center of everything?
Yeah, but he's not. He's pre-60s, I think.
Okay. Before it became the Northeast corridor.
No, Allen is Rensselaer, Albany, north of New York City. He is not into the corridor.
Okay. Dan, what era? So you're looking modern 80s or later. I've seen some people out on Facebook who are modeling the Northeast corridor. Check like the NMRA Facebook group or HO Scale Model Railroading. You might also want to drop a question out in the groups.io page. Let me get you the link for that.
Man.
So. All right. Mike O'Neill, you said you have a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was thinking about this. I had an op session yesterday and just kind of brainstorming again. You know, when you're designing a layout, how many cars do you need? So I was thinking, you know, whether it's JMRI or car cards. So let's keep it easy. Maybe there's 10 industries and they all get box cars to keep it really easy. You have a yard, a staging area, and these industries. You know, doing the math, you know, there's 10 industries. Does it take 2 cars per industry to run a cycle of, you know, staging to yard to industry and back? 4 cars, 3 cars, somewhere in between? I figured it would take 4, but I grossly over-engineered that. So I was just wondering if anybody's really thought like, hey, if I'm designing a brand new layout and I have 10 industries and they all get box cars, how many box cars would I need?
So here's a couple of questions, and I'm sure more people will have more examples. With your whatever sort of way billing system you're dealing with, are you having, so you've got the traditional 4 cycle, right? The car gets delivered to you empty, gets loaded, gets taken to another industry, gets unloaded, and then starts over. So I mean, that'd be a 4 cycle. You could do a 2 cycle where the car goes to the industry in 1 cycle and then goes off layout, right? It goes to some distant location and then comes back. So I mean, that'd be a 2 cycle way bill. Do you have any idea which one you're doing there, or which?
Well, yeah, either one. I mean, I guess, you know, if that's the question, right? If it's a 4 cycle and you have 2 industries you're serving out of the 10, if it's 2 cycle, you know, you're going off the layout.
Yeah,
I mean that would be simpler. Yeah.
The other question is whether you deliver from one industry, you know, let's say you have one that fills a boxcar and you have another industry on the layout that accepts that same filled boxcar and empties it.
I would look at it on not necessarily the waybill cycles, but how many sessions does it take to get from the staging yard to the industry? And so if you bring it out of staging and spot the load, pull the empty, and the same brings it back, then that would be 2 cars. If you bring it from staging to a yard, and then the next session from the yard to the industry, that would mean you would need 3 cars. Or actually, they would need 4 cars. Right. Because you've got basically 2 sessions to make the round trip. And, you know, if you have to go to a cleaning track and then the yard and then the thing, then you're talking about more. And then you have to figure out how many cars do you want to have, what percentage of the time do you want to spot the industry? Do you want to spot it every single session? And do you want to full spot it every session? So you take because, you know, the way we would figure how many cars you need to support like a coal train cycle, which is the absolute simplest, it would be, you know, how many days does it take? You got loaded and empty, and how many days does it take to make the trip? So if it takes, how many days does it take to make the round trip? So if it takes a week to get from A to B, and you have, so the round trip would be 14 days, you need 14 sets of equipment. If you're going to spot it every day, If you want 2 trains a day, you're going to need 28. So it's a matter of how long does it take to do the cycle and how many times, how many cars do you want to spot? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's what I originally thought. It would take 4 cycles to go from staging to yard, yard to industry, industry to yard, yard to staging. But that didn't work out that way. So I was just wondering what other people have done.
What didn't work?
You also need to consider the holds. Are those going to be at the industry only for one cycle, or from the cycle between the set out and the pickup, or will it be sitting there? How long does it take? How many days does it take to load that car?
No holds. Right.
No holds.
Because the session would be the next day type thing, right? As a choice.
Or shift or whatever, yeah.
Right.
What caused it to not work?
Oh, I just have way too many cars on the layout. That's all. It works perfectly fine. I have cars going from staging to staging because they can't get to the industries, so I'm taking more cars off. So I was just curious if other people had done overmathed it.
I've seen a lot of recommendations of just your overall car count. Don't care which way you're moving them, anything like that. You have to start with, okay, your industries. How often or which ones are what degree full? You know, it's like, yeah, you may have 4 spots at an industry, but normally you say, okay, they'll have 2 cars at, or maybe 3. This one's a unit train type thing. Okay, it's already going to have 12 and change 12 every time. And you figure out what those percentages. That says, okay, well, here's what needs to fit out there on the line. But the other side is your yards. Most people find if a yard gets, you know, as you start getting from 50% to 75% occupied, your ability to switch it goes way down.
Yes.
So you have to look at that overall number. And many times this is where you'll figure out, okay, I don't have enough of this track or that track for the number of cars, or not enough cars for the cycle, but I ran out of space.
You also said, you know, occasions where cars go from staging to staging. Who's making that decision to send it to staging?
I'm using JMRI, so it knows it's smart enough to says, hey, I can't get to an industry because it's full, so I'll just send it over to the staging. And you can turn that off, and then cars fill up the yard and they back up anyway.
Right.
So that's what I was just reading all the reports today, going through it again, going, why are cars going from staging to staging? And as I'm taking more cars off, it seems to be helping get them to the industries, as opposed to, and you can overload industries and underload them and put waits time and everything. But I just have a lot of cars going from staging to staging, but I think I have too many cars in the layout. So as I take more off, it seems to be working better.
How many industries do you have on the layout right now, Mike?
You know, I don't have, I don't know the number offhand. Somebody asked me that the other day. I'm like, I don't know. I lost count. Because it's also not just industries, right? It's spots, wait times.
Right.
You know, if I wait 0 versus 1 versus 2. Again,
the other question I would have is, what type of railroad is this? Is this a bridge route, or is it a short line?
Yeah, it's just a standard a short line trying to, you know, hit as many industries. Because I want the trains to be pretty busy, not necessarily every industry every day, but sometimes the trains get a little thin. And then, like I said, I'm looking at staging to staging. I'm like, well, I don't want to just run cars staging to staging. I want them to get on the layout, do something, and leave. So just trying to tune what I have. First time I've ever done this myself. It's only a year into the operating with the layout. So things are flowing well, but I'm just noticing a lot of cars going from staging to staging. I'm like, this is silly, but.
Well, of course, if you're using JMRI, you actually don't physically need to take the cars off the layout. You can just kind of remove them from the inventory and then run a couple sessions and see what happens. And when you keep running the sessions until it drops down, you'll know how many cars you'll need.
Right.
I mean,
I've also done that. I actually have a fake. I have 2 staging yards. So I, you know, cars go into staging, they wait a session, then they go into the outbound staging, and then they cycle back on. So I'm slowing the cars down to make it look more variety. But at the same time, I'm like, but why are cars just not routing to industries?
It
I'm going through the build reports.
It depends on those industries and what you have. I run 4-cycle waybill, and at first I started with an average of about 4 cars per industry. I've got 41 industries on the layout right now, and I've got 450 cars on the layout. Now, obviously, I have some pretty big staging yards and some pretty big yards, and my yards don't get so clogged up like what Ken was saying. You know, you get them clogged up, they're not functioning anymore. But I would start with 4 cars per spot. Because if you think about it, if you're running 4 cycles, there's 4 places for them to go. And then take 4 times the number of industries you have. And that could be a fairly good rule of thumb, but you're gonna have to run them and find out what's going on.
Right, and that's what I started with, and that's why I figured that's too many. But continue to tune.
All right. There's a question here in the chat about JMRI for operations. I've switched over to JMRI. I have 4 locals and 4 through freights coming in or starting at the yard. Do you use multiple locals in yard?
Don't quite understand the question because I have
Eric,
trains that
can
go
you
from
hear me?
staging to yard.
Yeah, go ahead, Tom.
There
That
you
was
go.
your question.
Okay, what I've got is I've got 4 locals that start in the yard and go out, and I have 4 through freights that come in, drop off cars, pick up. Everything's working fine, except in the yard. I end up doing a handwritten switch list for the yard master. And I wonder if the guys who have a yard or operate this thing, if they're doing an individual, at least on paper or in the computer on JRMI, is an individual train that goes in and out operating the different tracks to the different locals, or do you let basically one switcher do everything? And then I've tried that, and I get a list that's about 4 pages long for the guy, and they're just moving cars back and forth. And I was just wondering how other people were doing it.
For me, the JMRI, what I do is that the inbound train that parses it out to the classified tracks, then you just hand the paperwork over to the yard master, and the yard master says, here, these cars go to track 1 through 5 or whatever it is, as opposed to a switch list that you can generate for just the yard master, which is those 4 pages throughout the day.
Yeah, it doesn't work.
Yeah, I find the paper, just handing over the paper, the crew says, here, you know, I brought the train from here to the yard, and the JMRI says, here, break down these cars to this destination, and the crew just uses that paper. When they're done with it, I put it in a file. They have a little, you know, train terminated, you know, paperwork, and they just throw it in there, which is really handy, which is another plus for JMRI, is that literally I tell people just write whatever you find on the page there. And at the end of the session, it's like flipping a book page by page, and you just take notes if something's mislabeled or something's in the wrong spot. A coupler's broken. Yeah, is so convenient. Didn't realize
my guys
that.
are doing that now. Last operating session, they put the notes on there, then trying to sometimes decipher their handwriting, but it's a different story. Because the biggest problem, I've got 320 cars on the railroad, and it's 2 separate railroads, and they're interchanged, and that part works fine. It was just the yard, and I just wonder how other people were doing it, because it's been first time I tried to hand it over to the yard master and gave him this list, and it was like, what do you want me to do with this thing? I think that's what we're just going to do it that way, what you just said.
Tom, you said you switched over. What did you switch over from?
Car cards and weight bills.
Okay.
I've used it for 20 years, and I got tired of with 2 separate railroads and going 2 different places. I can put notes on there. It tells them where to go. I had car cards. Nobody reads the cards, the instructions. So I do that this way, and it seems to be working a lot better. But I'll tell you what, like in my steel mill, there's 12 crews up there, and it seems to have really slowed down the steel mill operation. I don't know why. They're moving the same amount of cars, but it just seems like it slowed it down. So I can't figure that one out yet.
One question for you. When they classify cars into the yard, how does the program track what car is, the car alignment in a track? Does it keep?
Doesn't.
The way I set mine up was I've got 5 tracks. I've got 4 separate locals that go out, and I have one is a pull track. So cars come in there, and the local works on that track. And sometimes there's a cold drag and another one. It doesn't get that much traffic. So I use 2 tracks for 2 different industries or group of industries, like the belt local and the coal work off the first track. And then, so when they get that list, it tells you it's in track 1, track 2, track 3, track 4, where the cars are at. And 99% of the time, because it's where it's supposed to be at.
And how about the lineup, though?
It doesn't track it. It does not. JMRI doesn't have the concept of standing order.
No.
Okay. All right.
No.
Does that create a problem for you? That's one of the problems I had when I used the switch list.
It seems to be working okay. I mean, I've got 2 locals that go out, and they'll be out there most of the time. There's a lot of switching, and it's working. And the problem I really had was originally the steel mill, because I've got staging up here feeding the steel mill with dedicated type of cars coming in, ore cars versus coke cars and all that. And what I did is I set it up as individual, each within the steel mill, each, we'll say industry, like the coke loader, it takes 2 different types of cars. So those trains come down in the Ingram yard and they break down, and it all works out. Sometimes it gets overloaded, but what I do is I could put a whole bunch of cars on the coke loader physically. And so I created I call Coke Express. It comes in the interchange yard. It goes directly over to the coke loader, comes back out, almost like Clairton Works did, Coke Express. So that's why I've been doing that. It works so far. I kept all the car cards in the boxes. I'm to make sure this thing's going to work okay.
Hey, Tom, Scott Sable here. I've used JMRI for quite a while. And I use switch lists in the yard, okay?
Okay.
And the manifests are for the road freights. Now, Andy is right, as you need a lineup. Okay, lineup is separately from JMRI. You know when your trains are coming in, you need a lineup for the yard, okay? Now, in JMRI, when after you build all your trains, you can print your switch list, right?
Correct.
Right, and the switch list will have each train as it comes in. You can also, in the print settings, you can have 1 train printed per sheet, okay?
Okay.
So what happens is, this is what I do. I would have 10 trains come in the yard. I'd have 10 sheets for the yard crew. Yard crew just needs to put those 10 sheets in the order of your lineup. And then they know what trains are coming when, and what cars have to ready, and when they're receiving, and all that kind of stuff. I find that's a lot easier to organize it.
Okay.
Because once they're done the sheet, they throw the sheet away or cross it off. Then they work on another sheet for the next train. And my guys have found no problems with that at all.
By any chance, are you using live with like a tablet marking off the cars, or are you just working off of a sheet?
I'm working off a sheet. So
okay,
there's pros and cons to getting trains moved in a session. Okay, like a lot of guys JMRI is kind of built for moving 1 car per session. Let's say is the way it was originally developed. The whole idea is that before you can move that car, you got to terminate it, right? Make it free up for the program.
Right.
And JMRI is not forward thinking like a car card is. Okay, it just takes the car, it goes 1 step at a time. So a lot of guys go live. And what they do is they build trains and terminate trains as the session goes on, okay? Now, unfortunately, that does not work for switch lists, because the switch lists almost need to be ahead of the manifests in order to get things ready for the trains.
Right.
So what I end up doing is I do all my paperwork before the session.
So do I.
Yeah. So what I end up doing is I actually break my session, my 24-hour session down into 3 8-hour sessions. So what I'll do is I'll build before the session, I'll build my 10 trains, and then I'll print off all the switch lists for those trains and give those to the yard crews, okay? Or have piles for the yard crews. I would then terminate those 8 trains, then I'd build the next 8 and print the switch list, and then so on for the third trick. Okay. So what happens now is all my paperwork's printed. Okay. For the session, all the crews, yard crews, have their switch list ahead of time. Okay. For the whole session, even though the cars may not be there. Okay. Now, the one drawback is sometimes the car doesn't show up, and it's as it says on, because of operator error. And that's one thing I've lived with. I said, listen, if a car doesn't come in, you guys got the paperwork, just cross it off. We'll say it's on the rip track or whatever, and just keep going. Right. But with that, doing it that way, everything's printed off. No one's waiting for someone to terminate a train or cars and all that kind of stuff. It's the guys just, when they're done, pick up the next lot of paper and off they go. The yard crews, I find, are actually getting ahead of the guys because they can see what's coming 2 or 3 trains down the road. They may be working ahead, and that helps out. That helps out for the congestion of the yard, I find, too.
Yeah.
So that's how I do it. And I found it, like I said, I think it's the 1 sheet per train will help the confusion issue because they just have to deal with 1 sheet.
Yeah, all the crews have 1 sheet, you know, or it may be multiple sheets because the switching.
Yeah.
But it was just mainly the yard master job.
Yeah. So like I said, in the print options, when you go down the switch list, you can actually print 1 sheet per train.
Okay.
And then, like I said, the guys, they just concentrate on that 1 sheet, and when it's done, they move on to the next sheet.
Okay.
So give it a try.
Okay.
I do have a question, Tom, or anybody else, JMRI. I used ProTrack for years, and now I am using car cards and very happy with them. But with ProTrack, we had a problem where you would have, say, 25 cars sitting in the yard to go northbound, and ProTrack would put maybe 12, 15 of them on there. And there's next to nothing to help you get those other 12 cars on the train to get them out of the yard. And our yard would start stacking up with short trains leaving. Do you have any of that kind of problem with JMRI?
It all, because the space it figures out how much space you're going to have. It's not going to let you go over putting the cars in there. So far, because at the beginning of the session, it seems like I have a full yard until the locals start, and it'll take out 15 cars on the 1 train. Will head out, opens up the space, but it will only bring back in the cars. That amount of space that was left will bring another train in. And I've had to change in the settings on cars. I've had to play with that a little bit to make it work so not too many cars are in for one industry to do or interchange.
Right. Okay.
Okay. Let's see. There's a Joe who asked a more basic question about JMRI regarding the order of pickups and setouts.
Yeah, that's me. I am very new as I'm just starting looking at JMRI operations and trying to set up just a basic train, 1 industry with 2 cars coming in, 2 cars coming out. When I try and have it build the train, it will only take the 2 cars out because it doesn't think there are spaces for the 2 cars coming in. And then if I print the list, it wants to do the setouts before the pickups. In any operating session I've been in, you do the pickups first and then do the setouts. Is there a way to get JMRI to look at it that way? So you can make space for the 2 cars coming in and pick up the 2 that are going out.
Yes. If you go to the spur setting, you can, what they call overload, you can set, by default, it's disabled. So you have to pick up the car and then it says it's empty and then go put 1 there. If you want 100%, and you can read this up, it's on their document page and stuff, I'll look for it. But basically you can plan for a spur to be 100% pickup. That's 1 choice. And then you can do it 50%, 60%. There's pros and cons on that. You know, if you assume the train's going to get there or not, so you got to be careful, but there is a way of doing that.
Okay, I didn't see that in the documentation when I was looking for it, but I will look for it again.
We'll find it here.
It's called planned pickups. I don't know if you guys can hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you, Jason.
Super. It's called planned pickups. The other thing you can do is, and I do this for both the railroads I manage, changing the number of passes. When you build your manifest, it defaults, I think, to 1, which is normal or simple. Change it to advanced, so it does like 2 passes, and it'll know that you're actually picking up those cars, so it can actually bring out 2 more that you can spot.
Okay, I can look for that too.
Another option is so-called aggressive mode, which also increases how it can go. Okay, yeah, this may not really be empty yet, but it's supposed to be, and it helps move things.
Yeah, I definitely prefer aggressive mode over planned pickups. Planned pickups you should use sparingly, only when needed, because you can get yourself into trouble with planned pickups and like overcommit your spurs.
Okay, thank you. I'll give some of those things a try and see what happens.
Another question on JMRI, does it allow you to leave the cars as close as possible off spot? Can you do that while you're at the industry working?
Yes.
Okay.
It'll do it, then it'll come back up and say you have to reset it the next time around. Tells you where to put the car in or on the paperwork.
Yeah, inside JMRI, you can designate an alternate track for off spots. Let's say you've got a track that's a small little storage track somewhere. You can say for this town, put the off spots there, and then JMRI will remember for next run and then move the off spots when the track frees up.
I have a question for I use JMRI for my track plan and dispatcher control of switches and such, and but my question is in the operations. Say I have a car at Queensley Furniture in Medford right now. A local could pick that car up, deliver it to the yard in Dunsmore. That could get thrown onto a manifest freight, go up to Portland, and then from Portland it can go up to Wishram Lumber. Now, how much once the car goes from Medford into Dunsmore, does that have to be entered in to say yes, it's at Dunsmore, and you can throw it onto the next train? I mean, how much data input has to be done for it to know that car is at a yard, and take it from that yard to the next yard, and then take it from that yard to its delivery point? So it's actually 1, 2, 3. It's on 3 trains. And do you just does it know once that train has been delivered and terminated that it's that car is now available to go to the next yard?
So that's the key. You just said it yourself. It's once the train is terminated, the car that's being routed, which should have a final destination if you're using schedules, JMRI will know that train has an ultimate, what they call an FD, or final destination of, I forget what the final industry was, but in
lumberyard.
Lumberyard. So JMRI is going to figure out a route for that car through multiple moves, and each move, the train has to be terminated, and then JMRI will know, yep, that train or that car reached its interim position, let's say a yard. Now it's available for pickup from another train that will help it along in its journey or its route, so there could be 2, 3, 4 segments.
Well, let me ask you, instead of a piece of paper, my dispatcher runs, the Panel Pro. Can he say, okay, train 232 or 302, I'll use actual numbers. Train 302 is now terminated in Dunsmore Yard. Can he push on a button, if you will, a sensor, and let JMRI know that 302 is back and done, and all those cars are now available.
It's so, yeah, I mean, if I'm understanding it correctly, that is the process of terminating a train. Terminating a train indicates to JMRI that the train has reached its final destination. All of the cars have been spotted accordingly, according to the manifest, and those cars are now free and available to be picked up by another train or free for their next move, whatever that's going to be. So until the train has been terminated, it's already allocated in another train and it can't be touched. So a car can only be in one train at a time. So each time you move a car, it moves in a train, the train gets built, the car gets moved, the train gets terminated. The next train gets built, picks up that car, moves it, and it's terminated, and so on and so forth. So terminating the train is the act of making that car free again for something else to pick it up.
And who terminates that train? Does the yard master notify the computer operator, or how do you know that train's been terminated?
So someone has got a paper manifest in their hand, or I don't know, some people might actually use iPads because that's a thing too. You can have a JMRI server. I don't personally, but once the once the road crew or the yard master, whoever has the manifest, has completed the work and ticked all the boxes and whatnot, that manifest also ultimately gets routed to someone that goes back to the JMRI computer and performs that physical act of terminating the train in the software.
Okay, thank you.
It's going to be different for everyone's railroad. I call it, I call myself the superintendent or JMRI master at my railroad, and so I'm the one that ultimately receives the paperwork. I terminate the train, and then I build the new trains and print the manifests and hand them out to the appropriate people.
Called the traffic manager at times as well. Separate from it's a separate job, depending on the size of the layout, it's a separate job from the dispatcher. But,
yeah, it probably have to be.
Yeah. Okay, so there's a question for the group. My layout is in its infancy in operations. I hosted a session recently, but found it difficult to fill 5 operator positions. The session was on a Saturday, 4 to 6:30 p.m. I had it listed for a month on the OPSIG website and promoted on my Facebook group. I know there's a modeling community of operators here in the Dallas-Fort Worth from operating on other layouts. What are good ways to generate a crew roster or other operating days or times better for sessions? So Joe, there's a number of people have already, or Mike has already chimed in a couple times.
Yeah, and then Eric, I saw this earlier. People send out like 2 weeks ahead of time, but you guys had a thing a couple of years ago that someone said, hey, they send out like 3 months at a time. I have found that to be very helpful. And then you can just fill in 1 or 2 people. Other people out here do it like every Saturday, 2 weeks before at 8 a.m. Watch your email, first come, first serve. But yeah, it's all about getting the list of people. Yeah.
We do that here in Arizona where we send it out on a quarterly basis. I throw out my crew call, give everybody 2 weeks to respond, assign them to the layout, and then send out the layout assignments. And the days are already picked. And a number of the other layouts do a similar thing.
Yeah, I think days and times are really dependent on the audience, right? I still work, so I can't come to a Monday to Friday 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. session. However, if you've got a bunch of retirees, there are a number of sessions that are hosted on operatingsessions.com here that are daytime sessions. Some of the layout owners alternate between evening or weekend sessions versus daytime sessions. We're just having a discussion. I don't remember where I think it was up at Minrail about having morning sessions because everybody is still awake and fresh at that point. Obviously, it doesn't help the people who are still working, like me, but
we do a similar thing where I personally I do a Wednesday session that's a daytime session, a Saturday session that's a daytime session, and then a Tuesday night session. And I do one of each per month per quarter. So I'm doing 9 sessions per quarter. And we found that actually works out because it does accommodate the people who work.
Yep.
And I also found that working Saturday sessions aren't a very good thing either, because that's when you're catching up on all the honey-do things around the house.
Yep.
So evening sessions when you're working tend to be the handiest thing.
Yeah.
You know, in Omaha here, the sessions tend to be on Mondays and Tuesday nights. And then there's a couple guys that have them like a Tuesday or Thursday morning for the retired guys. And the key, one of the other things is if you can find another person that operates and get their invite list, get them to give you their email list for who they send stuff out, that'll help you get a wider net to send out invites to people actively, as opposed to passively putting it on a bulletin board and waiting for people to come to you.
Yeah. I'll put in a completely shameless plug for my site, operatingsessions.com. Since there are, we just had the national down there in Dallas Fort Worth. There are probably some Dallas Fort Worth based operators down there now. That might be a way to at least advertise that you're having a session.
That's good points for both Dave and Eric, and also consider talking to the other layout owners in your area so that you're making sure you're not scheduling your sessions on top of theirs.
Yeah. Yep.
We've talked about trying to get a master operator calendar of just of the owners, like, hey, you have the second Saturdays all the time of the month, but when are you going to be gone? And you have the first Saturdays, when are you going to be gone? Because as newbies are trying to find the new spots, but it's just more technology that people are like, yeah, well, I just have a regular thing, it works for me. And I've also piggybacked some stuff. Someone is, a Friday night, and I'm like, hey, I'll do the Friday day before that. And retired people like having 2 or 3 sessions in a day, if you can stand that long.
Yeah, I was gonna say this event sponsored by ibuprofen and Advil, but yeah, I mean, what we did, I know we set this up for like the coordinators across the country who are planning the big, what we call regional events. There is a list on groups.io for them so that we can at least try to have some sort of a coordinated calendar. Now, some of that we could do with OpSig, but part of it is the fact that there are certain events that we can't even mention on OpSig for fear of people losing their minds because they are private. Nobody wants to know about them. However, you need to know about them if you're trying to schedule something. So this may end up being part of OpSig at some point, but right now it's just this this ops coordinator list that I set up back a few years ago, just so that the coordinators know, hey, there are big events going on this weekend. Obviously, an event in California might not need to worry about an event in Florida, but it's at least good to know, hey, if it's a very large event in Florida, that may be drawing some of your crowd. So, but at this point, there are so many different operating events. I mean, we have just in our area, there were 4 that were operating, like two a year, one in the fall, one in the spring. But it's getting to the point, it's like, well, we may need to cut that back to just 1 per year instead of 2, simply because we keep running into conflicts and then we can't fill our spots. So, but yeah, definitely what everybody has said, talk to the other owners, recruit at the various events, look for the people, set up a groups.io list for your potential members, do it on operatingsessions.com, do it on, just informal email lists and so on. But before if you have a railroad owner who does a list where they put all of the names in the 2, make sure you've got their permission before you reply to it to try to co-opt that list for your own purposes.
Nah, just steal it.
Well, you know, I mean, what's the worst they can do? Take away your birthday? Yeah, there's no good answer. I think a lot of the comments were good ones. Just, you know, do your best to say, hey, I want to operate too. And I want people to come and play here too. I think you just have to, at a certain point, just have to put a stake in the ground and say, well, I'm going to operate this night. And if there's enough operators, there's going to be plenty of slots to go around. So
consider also that hosting sessions starts to go or spread the word as well by word of mouth.
Yep.
Exactly.
All right. Well, we had a great discussion as we hit 50 people, which is also great. Want to thank everybody for coming. One quick thing, we put this up in the newsletter and up on the OPSIG page. We do have OPSIG. Oh, I got to turn off the background. If you haven't gotten any of the OPSIG stickers that we're using to help plug the organization, let me show you what they look like once I turn off my background. Very fancy. If you want some, I'll put my name and address in the chat. You just need to send me it because the postage is expensive. We're just asking you to send me a self-addressed stamped envelope and I will send you stickers. If for some reason you can't do that, let me know and you can pay me $1 and I'll mail you some. And that'll cover the postage. But I'll put
What's the size of those stickers, Eric? And what size envelope you need?
These are, I believe they're 3 by 3. So 3 inches square. And then they basically punch out around the logo. They're called Kiss Cut. So we've been seeing these popping up in pictures all over the place. So it's a good way to help promote the organization. Got the opsig.org website on there. Gave away a few of these on my travels to Arizona this past week. Wanted to thank Rick Watson for letting me come over and ogle his layout, as well as if there's anybody from the Scottsdale Club, David Doiron and Eric Heiser, all let me come visit their layouts. So we'll have some pictures up on the OPSIG Facebook page in the near future once I get all that sorted out. So in the meantime, if you want some stickers, send a self-addressed stamped envelope to my address there in the chat and I will get them out to you. So
hey, Eric, there was
go ahead.
There was a comment when I first signed on to the session tonight about AI being used. And I don't know if OPSIG is using that or my internet service provider is using that. Or...
This is it's a Zoom feature. What it's doing is it's summarizing the session. I just wanted to see what it did, but it's nothing insidious or anything like that. In theory, it's going. I'll see what it does, but sometimes we get a lot of good discussion. To have a written transcript of it is maybe what it's doing. But like I said, I don't know. I don't know what it's doing. So
your name's on a list, Travers. There'll be a knock at your door shortly.
Watch for the black helicopters.
The benevolent overlords.
Yes, I for one welcome our robot overlords. But like I said, it's just experimentation. So, all right. Well, like I said, thanks for everybody who came. We'll do another one of these. One other quick note. I don't know why I didn't do this before. The meeting invitation codes will remain the same going forward. I'm not sure why I didn't do that before, but so like the open forum has the connection code you used will remain the same. The virtual meetup, which our next one will be November 12th, where we have the planned presenter. that one has a different code, but it will remain the same. And then also, if you use CATS, part of JMRI, or it's an add-on to JMRI, OPSIG is hosting the CATS Open Mic Night on November 7th. It's basically the first Thursday of the month. We are basically helping to sponsor that for them. So we're putting all that up on the YouTube channel to get a little bit more support for them. So
will there be a reminder email about that TAPS, Eric?
the CATS they handle their own promotion through there's a CATS JMRI or a CATS groups.io list. But I just happened to see it in my Zoom schedule here. So like I said, that one is the first Thursday of the month, but theirs is not necessarily hosted. So you may show up and there might not be anybody at it. They don't actively, it's more like if somebody wants to show up and participate, great, but they don't actually have a host. Does that make sense?
Yeah, gotcha.
So, but like I said, then I go through kind of edit it down and put up the relevant parts up on YouTube. So, all right. Well, I wanted to thank everybody for coming. I'm going to stop the recording now.